former Goldman Sachs analyst just put $1,000 price target on XRP. Let that number sink in for a second. $1,000 per coin. For an asset trading today at right around $1, that is a move of roughly 74,000%. And the moment that prediction hit, the internet did what it always does. Every hype channel slapped it on a thumbnail and started screaming. But almost nobody is doing the one thing that actually matters, which is calmly asking whether that number makes any mathematical sense and what the realistic version of this story actually is. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. By the end of this video, you'll know who actually made this call and what credibility it really carries, the honest math behind $1,000 XRP, and the real, grounded bull case underneath the hype, the part that's genuinely worth paying attention to. Because this channel is called Verified, and I'd rather give you the truth than the loudest number in the room. Let's get into it. One honest note first. Everything here is research and perspective to help you understand the story, not financial advice. I'm not telling you what to buy, sell, or hold. We're going to talk about some enormous numbers, and I want you to hold every single one of them lightly. Do your own research, and let's walk through it together. So let's start with who actually made this prediction, because the framing matters. The person behind the $1,000 call is Dom Kwok, a former Goldman Sachs investment banking analyst. And right away, you can see why this one spread so fast. It's not some anonymous account with a rocket emoji in their name. It's someone with a real Wall Street pedigree. And that Goldman Sachs label gives the prediction an air of authority that an ordinary influencer call just doesn't have. And here's the part the hype thumbnails usually leave out. His target isn't for next week or even next year. He's talking about XRP reaching $1,000 by 2030, end of the decade. That's a critical detail because a long timeline is the only way a number like this can even be discussed seriously. So credit where it's due. At least this version comes with a realistic clock attached, instead of promising you riches by Friday. But a fancy resume doesn't bend the laws of math. So let's do the calculation that the loud side of the internet refuses to do. For XRP to reach $1,000 a coin, its total market value would have to climb to somewhere north of $50 trillion. Sit with that figure for a moment. $50 trillion is close to half of the entire world's annual economic output. Every country, every company, every market on the planet combined, for one cryptocurrency. To get there from where XRP sits today, you'd need an increase of around 74,000%. So let me be the honest voice here. Is that impossible forever? No. But is $1,000 XRP a realistic price target you should be planning your life around? Absolutely not. Anyone presenting that number as a near-term certainty is selling you a fantasy dressed up in a Goldman Sachs suit. And to be fair and complete, this isn't the only four-figure call out there. Another well-known commentator, Jake Claver, has floated XRP hitting $1,000 on an even more aggressive timeline by the end of 2026. But only if a long list of major institutions, names like BNY Mellon, Fidelity, Citi, Franklin Templeton, and JP Morgan, all fully adopt Ripple's settlement infrastructure. And that little word, if, is doing an enormous amount of heavy lifting. These aren't forecasts. They're best-case thought experiments stacked on top of best-case assumptions. So when you see a $1,000 XRP headline, the right response isn't excitement and it isn't anger. It's a calm, simple question. Based on what and by when? Now here's where I want to flip this around, because if I just spent the whole video mocking a big number, I'd be no better than the channels hyping it. The truth is, underneath the silly headline target, there's a genuinely real and grounded bull case for XRP. And that part deserves your attention far more than the $1,000 fantasy. So let's talk about what's actually driving these predictions, stripped of the moon math. First, institutional infrastructure. This is the real engine. The entire thesis behind XRP isn't about a meme. It's about XRP being used as settlement plumbing by major financial institutions for cross-border payments and liquidity. And that's not pure speculation anymore. Ripple has been aggressively building and acquiring to wire itself into traditional finance, and serious institutions are circling the XRP ecosystem in a way that simply wasn't happening a few years ago. Second, regulatory clarity. The long legal cloud that hung over XRP for years has largely lifted, and clearer rules are exactly what big, cautious institutional money needs before it'll move at scale. Third, the macro backdrop. Some analysts make a more philosophical argument. that in a world of constant money printing and a weakening dollar, the ceilings on hard assets become almost theoretical over long stretches of time. You don't have to fully buy that to recognize it's a more honest framework than just shouting a number. So what does a grounded view actually look like? Instead of $1,000, the more measured analysts are watching real, nearby levels. Support has been forming around the low end of the current range, with resistance overhead that XRP keeps bumping into. And if the institutional adoption genuinely accelerates and the charts cooperate, some analysts point to technical targets in the low single digits, figures like $4 to $5 over the next 6 to 12 months as a more realistic upside scenario. Now notice the gap. A few dollars versus $1,000. Those are two completely different universes, and knowing the difference between them is exactly what separates an informed holder from someone chasing a headline off a cliff. And here's the quiet damage that a $1,000 headline actually does to you. It poisons your sense of perspective. If your brain is anchored to $1,000, then a move to $4 or $5, which would be a massive, life-changing gain for most people holding XRP, suddenly feels like a letdown. That's the real cost of the screaming. It doesn't just mislead you about the destination, it steals your ability to feel good about genuine, healthy progress along the way. The grounded investor protects themselves from that by ignoring the fantasy number entirely and watching the actual machine being built, the institutions, the infrastructure, the adoption, one real step at a time. So let's bring it all home. Yes, a former Goldman Sachs analyst really did put a $1,000 target on XRP. And yes, the timeline is 2030, not tomorrow. But the math behind that number, a market cap rivaling half the world economy, tells you to treat it as a dream, not a forecast. The mistake was never being optimistic about XRP. The mistake is letting someone bolt a made-up number onto a real trend and calling it a certainty. The real story here isn't $1,000. It's that XRP is slowly graduating from a token everyone argued about into a piece of financial infrastructure that serious institutions are quietly building around. And that kind of shift doesn't show up as one explosive candle. It shows up as a slow, steady stack of legitimacy. The crowd is staring at the $1,000 headline. You're watching the foundation actually being laid. One of those is fantasy. The other is real, and it's happening right now. One last reminder before I go. This video is for educational purposes only and is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. Crypto is volatile and genuinely risky, and you should always do your own research before making any decision. My only job here is to give you the real picture, the documented facts, and the honest unknowns, so you can think clearly for yourself. If you appreciate getting the verified version instead of just the loudest number in the room, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And tell me in the comments, forget $1,000. What's a realistic XRP price you'd actually be happy with this cycle? I read every single one. Take care, stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next one.